Ukraine is calling it another kind of terrorist attacks. Russian forces continue their onslaught against critical infrastructure nationwide. President Volodymyr Zelensky says the attacks, which intensified last week, have destroyed nearly a third of Ukraine's power stations. Kyiv is now formally asking for more robust help from Israel as NATO rushes to deliver air defense systems to help intercept the swarms of Iranian-made drones striking targets far beyond the front lines in the capital, Kyiv, and across the country.
Officials in the southern Ukrainian city of Mykolaiv pull a man's body from the rubble. A Russian missile killed him as he hid in the basement. His shocked neighbor recalls the moment of impact.
We woke up at 1:45 in the morning because of a very loud explosion. It's impossible to describe. So much dust. We were in the basement. We crawled out through openings in the ground. Our neighbour died, unfortunately. He was a bit closer to the epicentre, while we were a bit farther away.
For many Ukrainians, the past 8 months have been a seemingly endless series of horrors. But one resident took comfort in the belief that his country holds the moral high ground, no matter how much suffering Moscow piles on them.
The Russians get pleasure from us feeling bad. They feel pleased. I think they want us to bomb and shell their buildings and so on. But we won't, so we can show that we are different from them.
Civilian residences aren't the only buildings targeted by the Kremlin. Russian forces also seem determined to knock out the country's energy grid. According to the mayor of the city of Zhytomyr, airstrikes on the power plant there left 11 settlements without power. While Russia denies deliberately attacking civilians, it says it's targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure, meaning millions could be left to face the coming winter without heat or power.
And I can now welcome James Hodson. He's the co-founder of the Economists for Ukraine group and joins us from Berkeley, California. Welcome to the day, Mr. Hodson. Large parts of Ukraine's power infrastructure have been destroyed in a single week. Some places are currently even without water. How dangerous is that for the country?
Oh, thank you, Nicole. It's great to be back on the show. Now, yeah, it's hard to understate how dangerous it is for a country to lose this much energy infrastructure in such a short period of time. It's obviously going to put a lot of pressure on the emergency forces and on the energy services within the country to replace, repair, and find alternatives in many places. Now, Ukraine is a country that gets very cold in the winter. It's a continental climate, and cold causes death. Cold causes increased illness and other complications in society. We're going to see businesses and schools that can't operate even more than they have in the past. And it will also impact areas like food logistics, which become more fragile over time. However, I think that the economic angle is especially important to consider in this case, which is that the Ukrainians have been talking for a while about the need to get people back to the cities, get them back to work, get them back to paying taxes, get them back to a normal life. And the biggest reason why these attacks are happening now is to prevent that from happening, prevent the return of any kind of stability in corners of Ukraine that we're getting used to some semblance of normalcy over the past couple of months.
Yeah. With a third of power stations affected after a week, doing very simple maths here, that means that Russia could take out the rest in another 2 weeks, basically. Is that a likely scenario?
Okay, so the nature of energy grids is a little bit more complex than kind of a linear relationship with removal of these nodes. So it's unlikely that, if you take out a third in 1 week, you take out the full amount in 3 weeks. That's very, very resilient. It actually I was lucky enough just 4 weeks ago to be in Kiev and to speak with the Minister for Energy and Minister for Infrastructure. And I do believe that the Ukrainian energy grid, encompassing all different energy sources and also on net, under circumstances of last week, for instance, selling energy to Europe, and in fact having a long history of selling excess energy to others. I think that the grid is more resilient than we give it credit for. However, what we need to take into consideration is that these Iranian drones are cheap, and the Ukrainians are shooting them down with expensive Western-provided missile systems. If I had to guess, the Russians are playing the game of trying to burn down the supply of Western-provided missiles in order to then take on potentially much more damaging and broader strikes that could take out large portions of energy and other critical infrastructure with their own dwindling supplies of guided missiles. And of course, it brings up the whole conversation about the importance of air defenses and effectively closing the skies, which is what I believe we've been saying for 7 months at this point.
We've now seen Ukraine formally asking for help from Israel, actually, to boost its air defense capabilities. Do you think Israel will get involved in a more robust way?
It would be very difficult for me to take a strong position in terms of my knowledge of Israel and its history. I think we'll just have to wait and see what Israel does in this situation. I think the moral prerogative at this point clearly states that they need to be doing more than they have been doing. But the moral prerogative is often not the one that is most important when countries are making decisions, unfortunately.
That is unfortunately correct. You know Ukraine very well, and you've come to know it even better throughout this conflict. And over the past 8 months, the people of Ukraine have become masters of rebuilding what Russia destroys, often in a matter of days. How can they go about fixing these vast damages to the critical infrastructure, presumably, at times without power?
Yeah, and of course, you can't really train for this, although the emergency services are supported also by teams across Europe. The Europeans are doing a fantastic job also enabling kind of the selling of spare parts and kind of infrastructure enabling components that can help to re-enable some of these substations. But when you're doing this under circumstances of continued attack, right, it changes the dynamics of the situation. Now, the Ukrainians are very good at creating temporary infrastructure. They're very good at plugging gaps. They've done a fantastic job interconnecting their infrastructure more over the past few months, which does make it more resilient. I think what we need to see is the EU, US, UK, and others stepping up to ensure that Ukraine has all of the replacement parts that it needs, that it has the manpower that it needs in order to carry out the emergency repairs. And moreover, if there are ways for us to help Ukraine to protect this new infrastructure and the repairs that they do, that's going to be extremely important. Now, as I mentioned, when I was in Kiev, I did get to see a few places around the city, and it was incredible to see the resilience of the population and how quickly they've been able to get back on their feet, clear the streets, get critical services running. In 2 days, I went to 2 different restaurants that were opened in the last 2 months. So this is a people that is definitely not giving up and that will continue to innovate and to develop.
James Hodson of Economists for Ukraine there. Thank you so much, Mr. Hodson.
Thank you.
And with those concerns over Ukraine's energy infrastructure, we have news from the investigation into leaks in the Nord Stream gas pipeline supplying Western Europe. Danish police now say those leaks were caused by powerful explosions, which did extensive damage. Footage shows at least 50 meters of the underwater pipeline is missing. The case is being treated as an act of sabotage. Today, the Kremlin said the investigation was being tailored to put the blame on Russia. Moscow accuses the West of being behind the explosions.